Hello and welcome to the channel. I am attira.kell, and today I thought we would try something a little different than the normal gameplay we have on the channel. In what is hopefully a series of videos, I'm going to apply my 18 years of experience as a soldier to the current experiences of Star Citizen. I'll talk about where we are today within the game and where I think we should be headed to replicate some level of realism within what is often referred to as a simulation. And remember, if you like what you see and you want me to delve into other aspects of how CIG can bring a more lifelike and realistic feel to the military professions of Star Citizen, please give me a like and share the video. We are going to lead off these videos with reconnaissance, because all successful operations begin with good and accurate reconnaissance. For this video, we'll specifically focus on the space or airborne perspective of recon, and it helps that CIG have a healthy amount of ships that can perform this role. We will talk about both ground reconnaissance and the counter reconnaissance mission for both space and ground in the future. However, we're not going to tackle those subjects in this video. So with that said, let's begin. Now, CIG have often drawn from past aircraft designs to gain inspiration for their ships. So too, to get an understanding of what we should expect from CIG for the recon profession, and to assess how well we can replicate existing reconnaissance capabilities, we must first turn to how things have been done in the past. A perfect core example of what we're thinking about when we think of flying our F-7CS Hornet Ghost around is the US Navy's use of the PBY Catalina aircraft in the Battle of Midway. Essentially using Mark I eyeball augmented with binoculars, these aircraft were flown in large search grids around Midway Island until they located the Japanese fleet. After reporting their findings to the US Carrier Strike Force and the forces on Midway Island, the US launched a successful airstrike at Japanese forces. There is, of course, more to the story, but you get the point. Now, that example serves as a good core idea of ship-based reconnaissance. However, World War II reconnaissance aircraft were fairly limited and don't really provide us with a great model for how it appears CIG is building out their reconnaissance-capable ships. So for that, let's jump forward to the 1950s and 60s at the height of the Cold War. I think it is sufficient to say that both the US and its NATO allies, as well as the Soviet Union, were fairly dedicated in their efforts to develop new ways to spy on one another. But for brevity's sake, I'll stick to the US side of things. Over these 2 decades, the US adapted almost every type of aircraft to have a reconnaissance variant. 7 types of fighters were modified to be reconnaissance capable, as well as 7 additional bomber aircraft were modified to fit the role. Additionally, there were 2 variants of transport aircraft repurposed to serve in the reconnaissance role. But it was these 2 decades that gave us the iconic purpose-built reconnaissance platforms, the U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird. In addition, the US began to toy with the idea of unmanned reconnaissance capabilities in the form of the Ryan Model 147. All told, the US fielded at least 19 different aircraft with some form of recon capability. Now, with that as our baseline, let's crosswalk all of this with what we currently have or are going to have in Star Citizen. For our cursory look at airborne platforms, we can safely argue that there are at least 5 categories of ships we should expect to see in CIG's lineup: fighters, bombers, transports, purpose-built reconnaissance ships, and an unmanned or drone ship. It is critical to note here that I am going to include some ships that might be better classified as pathfinders or explorer ships, but that could be modified via components to serve in a reconnaissance role. First, let's highlight the ships we think are purpose-built for reconnaissance. I think we can clearly place in this category the Terrapin, a tank yes, but designed to go out and find things, specifically for the UEE military. Next, we might include the Carrack, another UEE military ship specifically designed for exploration, which is a nice fancy civilian word for reconnaissance. We might also potentially place in this category the Herald, assuming CIG mounts some sort of listening capability into the ship. Now, specifically, I have left out so many others that you might consider reconnaissance specific ships, because these ships, specifically the Terrapin and the Herald, have no cargo associated with it, and the Carrack is a military ship repurposed for us as a civilian ship for exploration. So these ships are purpose-built to go out and find things for the military. Now we'll move over into the variant ships, as well as ships that might be repurposed for reconnaissance. Within the fighter variant category, we find the F-7CS Hornet Ghost and the F-7CR Hornet Tracker, both repurposed fighters on the F-7 chassis whose primary mission might be considered tactical reconnaissance. We might also find in this category the Aurora ES and the LX variants, the Mustang Beta, and the Origin 315P, all of which are Pathfinder variant ships, but that could clearly be repurposed with the right stealth components and perhaps increased sensor capabilities into entry-level reconnaissance type of ships. You also have in this category the Saber, which is a stealth fighter that could be kitted out to be a reconnaissance platform, as well as the Vanguard Sentinel, which by nature of its EW package would also have to be able to hear the enemy or an opponent so that you could then jam them. And then finally in this category you have the Razor EX, which is the stealth variant of the Racer. Moving on to bombers, within that bomber/torpedo boat category, the Eclipse is the immediate standout. Built for stealth, it could be an incredible capability if equipped with the right reconnaissance package within its base. The Retaliator is another ship that could clearly work with the right stealth components mounted, and more importantly with a reconnaissance module built and inserted into its torpedo base, which would offer maybe a more sophisticated crew run reconnaissance capability for that ship. Now moving on to transport or cargo ships, the most we have are those ships with a focus on exploration. So in that regard we have the C8 Pisces at the lowest capability, followed by the Freelancer Dur, and the Constellation Aquila, the Mercury Star Runner, and the Drake Corsair. We might also see the 600i Explorer turned towards reconnaissance, but honestly I think this is a bit of a stretch. But in this space, this is where CIG could really add some interesting gameplay. If there were containerized reconnaissance modules that look like normal containers, you might also transition the whole series of ships into reconnaissance platforms as well, offering cargo runners some very interesting and sneaky ways to make some additional coin. For the unmanned category, the only capability I see within the ship list that might serve in this capacity is the a.m.m.o. Though not in-game yet, the ship will have drones that you can send out, piloted from the ship, that could easily fulfill the reconnaissance role. That said, it isn't the only capability that is planned that I think can be twisted into a reconnaissance role. There is certainly more for CIG to design in this realm. For starters, the easy win is a reconnaissance mine dropped from the Nautilus mine layer. Fixed in location, this could provide a variety of different kinds of information, which we'll get into in a bit, either relayed back to the Nautilus or to an organization's flagship or a planet-side base of operations. And then finally, there certainly is a place in the verse for a purpose-built recon ship that might launch and recover reconnaissance-specific drones to collect on opposing organizations or NPC bases or whatever you happen to want to collect on. So, we have talked about what ships I think can fit into the reconnaissance role, but now we have to take a step forward and talk about the types of reconnaissance capabilities I think would shape a reconnaissance profession into something that the community would like to see in the game. Currently we have two ways to see our opponents. We have the passive sensors that pick up EM and thermal emissions from ships and translate that into our cockpit radar. The second way is through the active ping, which increases our scan range, which appears as a blue wave. When in scan mode, we can also scan an individual target ship to gain a lot of great information and details about that ship. So what would I change with active and passive sensors? Well, the first thing would be the range and how that information is displayed. A reconnaissance-focused ship should have a much more sensitive suite of passive sensors on board that can see much further than the standard ship of its class. In fact, I would expect a Ghost to be able to see farther than most cargo ships, which are much larger, simply because it is in fact a purpose-built variant. At the extreme end, the Carrack might be able to see half or even 2/3 of a system with its passive sensors. This could be displayed with a color scheme of blue for known friendlies, yellow for unknowns, and red for known hostiles, say if your ship detects a Vanville drive signature. For the Carrack specifically, this information might show in the cartography room, but for smaller ships, it could show on a special app on your Mobiglass. For the active ping, we don't necessarily have to expand its range, though I think that would be good, but you should get a lot more detail, or perhaps even detect ships that are entirely powered off. The trade-off, of course, is that you give your position away to anyone who is listening for your ping. The other big change I would make to the active ping is to dump the big blue wave. We don't need a visual stimuli outside of the cockpit. Instead, I would replace it with a three-dimensional MFD option for sensors, and you have to be watching that MFD to see the ping. Maybe all you would get is a signal strength and a direction, which means that if you're alone, you would have to move to get a second bearing on the ping if you were going to try and plot a point to move there, to pinpoint the other ship. Or if you have multiple ships operating together, you can combine their data if your ships are linked to gain an immediate position. In this case, the second ship would give you a cut, and the third ship would give you a fix. If the ships were linked, you could immediately plot a point in three-dimensional space and QD to that point. A nice way to ambush the sneaky reconnaissance pilot out there. And that gets into what we would call the counter-reconnaissance fight. But we'll save that for another video. Finally, this linked group of reconnaissance ships should be able to pass any coordinates they detect to other ships as they see fit. This would enable larger capital ships or fighter groups, or pirate fleets, to jump to and engage the targets found. But what comes next? What are the things we need to be able to collect in order to plan and execute a large-scale organizational event? What benefit can a stealth mission bring to the planning process for players and organizations? There are a myriad of different tasks players will want to undertake in game, and a great many of those will be against other players, other organizations, and other large NPC factions, all of which will have defensive capabilities that must be overcome first. So, what tools should we expect to see from CIG that would enable us as players to visualize that threat and the battlefield? There are three basic groupings of capabilities that I would recommend CIG work towards. The first is, of course, foundational, a planetary coordinate system which would enable us to geolocate targets on planets and an equivalent system in space. This has been talked about several times by CIG, and they know they need to come up with something. The next two that I would propose could be integrated into a pod sitting on a missile rack, which of course could come in a variety of sizes, which would determine capability. Or it could be integrated into a Nautilus dropped mine, or it could be integrated into some new unmanned recon drone operated out of some sexy new ship CIG comes up with, or it could be a new module for an existing ship. All of these would work. The first is what we call signals intelligence. This is basically subdivided into two core types. Electronic intel is all about what a person or ship or ground vehicle emits. Are you talking on the radio on in-game VoIP? You'll be generating a signal. Ship-to-ship comms? Again, you'll be generating a signal. But in this case, it will only be the external types of information. You wouldn't be able to hear what another player was saying. Maybe each ship has a unique comm signature, and an ELANT pod hanging on a Ghost will let you know if you are detecting an Aurora or a Javelin. Is there an anti-air vehicle or a building sitting near an enemy organization's base? ELANT would be able to help you determine that. The next type of signals intelligence is comment or communications intelligence, and this is the business of what is being said. In this case, your ship will need to have some type of special software that might let you decrypt another player's comm so that you can hear what they're saying. Or maybe you can see what they're typing in their party chat. The benefits of this are fairly self-explanatory. The next list of capabilities I think CIG should take a look at integrating into Recon gameplay would be the ability to take in-game pictures of, well, anything we want. But the key here is that these would not be screenshots. Just as with SIGINT, we could have a series of pods of varying sizes that could carry different types of cameras. Electro-optic pods might allow us to take pretty colored pictures of the enemy from orbit in a larger ship. For a smaller ship, you might have to enter the atmosphere to get a good shot. But this capability would only be good for daytime pictures and in good weather conditions. An infrared pod would provide pretty gray or green pictures, but would work best at night and generally again in good weather conditions. A thermal imagery pod would work day or night, but would have a hard time picking up a vehicle that has been inactive for a long period of time and whose temperature was that of the surrounding air. And finally, a synthetic aperture radar pod would produce a reasonable black and white picture that might require a little interpreting, but this would work in any weather condition. And with the new weather tech, carrying this capability could mean the difference between a failed mission and success. Now, there are other ways to capture an image, certainly, but these provide an interesting cross-section of what CIG could build into the game to give organizations tools to conduct recon against larger NPC objectives, other organizations, or simply to recon a new system for a potential base. I think that for all of these improved recon capabilities, you could manage the system through either an MFD or even better through an app on your mobiGlass. For larger ships, you might have an entire console or a bank of consoles dedicated to figuring out what the enemy picture is. Now, I can hear you saying in your mind, what player in their right mind is going to sit at a console and monitor satellites or some other type of persistent spy capability. And I agree with you. It is unlikely that players will find a lot of fun in monitoring an MFD for hours on end. This is, of course, where NPCs come into the mix, as they can monitor these persistent capabilities for players and have either a voice call out on a base or a large ship, or they could simply drop a text message onto a special app in your mobiGlas. Something like, signal consistent with Javelin class destroyer detected at XYZ coordinates. These coordinates could be linked up to your map, so you click it, set a course, and move to intercept. And finally, players will need to be able to assign targets to individual pilots and squadrons, as well as platoons on the ground. We'll need to know what type of terrain is passable and what is not. To accomplish this, CIG will need to design an in-game interface for players to display and plan around the information that their reconnaissance forces collect. So, with all that said, what do you think? Leave a comment down below on how you would like to see CIG update the reconnaissance gameplay. Is there anything I missed that you would like to see? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give me a like, and if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Come check out a.m.m.o, we'd love to play some games with you, and I'll see you in the next one.